At first there is almost nothing to see. The desert appears empty in the way only true deserts can, not simply quiet, not merely barren, but erased. A horizon of pale dunes stretches beneath a white sky that seems to bleach detail from the world itself. Wind moves across the sand in long invisible currents, reshaping the ground grain by grain, hour after hour, century after century. Nothing stays fixed here for long. Tracks disappear in minutes. Camps vanish in days. Entire roads dissolve in seasons. And somewhere beneath this shifting surface, according to stories that survive in fragments across generations, there is a city. Not a ruin standing proudly above the sand, like Petra or Palmyra. Not broken columns scattered across a valley, a buried city, a place supposedly swallowed whole. Travellers crossing the deep desert once described strange outlines appearing at dawn when the sun was low. Some claim they saw walls beneath the dunes after storms stripped the surface away for a few brief hours. Others spoke of staircases descending into sand, or dark openings that vanished by the following day. Caravan guides warned against certain stretches of land where the ground sounded hollow beneath camel hooves. Nomadic tribes carried stories about cursed ruins where no one should dig. In some versions, the city was abandoned after a great betrayal. In others, it was consumed by divine punishment. Some accounts insisted the inhabitants sealed themselves underground as the desert advanced around them. The details change depending on who tells the story, but one idea repeats with strange persistence. There was once a city here that did not want to be found. The desert keeps such stories alive because it creates the perfect conditions for uncertainty. Distance distorts scale. Heat bends light into impossible shapes. Entire lakes appear on the horizon and disappear moments later. Sound carries strangely across open dunes. Even experienced travellers become disoriented. A person can walk toward a landmark for hours without seeming to get closer. In such places, rumour becomes difficult to separate from observation. And yet, over the last century, fragments of evidence begin to accumulate. A line of worked stones emerges after a storm and disappears again beneath drifting sand. Ancient pottery is discovered far from any known settlement. Satellite surveys reveal geometric patterns beneath the dunes that do not resemble natural formations. Explorers following dry riverbeds uncover traces of walls buried deep below the surface. Archaeologists find evidence of roads crossing regions previously thought too hostile for permanent habitation, little by little. The old stories begin to feel less impossible. Because deserts are not timeless landscapes, they change, sometimes violently. Places now incapable of supporting a single village once held lakes, grasslands, forests, and dense human populations. Ancient rivers crossed lands that are now among the driest places on Earth. Regions filled today with silence once echoed with trade caravans, temple rituals, animal herds, and crowded markets. The modern desert often hides older worlds beneath it like layers of forgotten memory. What survives in the archaeological record suggests that entire societies adapted to climates very different from the ones seen today. Water systems extended across areas now completely dry. Settlements flourished in locations modern travellers would consider uninhabitable. In some deserts, rock art still depicts animals that no longer live there. Giraffes, cattle, elephants, hippos. The images remain carved into stone long after the environments that supported those creatures disappeared. And when those environments collapse, cities sometimes vanish with them. The buried city at the centre of this mystery exists somewhere between history and legend because evidence emerges unevenly. There is no single dramatic discovery that suddenly explains everything. No untouched palace uncovered intact beneath the dunes. Instead, there are scattered clues across enormous distances, broken inscriptions, half-buried foundations, oral traditions preserved by isolated communities, ancient texts referring to desert capitals whose exact locations remain uncertain. Every fragment points towards something larger without fully revealing it. Scholars still debate how many such lost settlements may exist beneath the great deserts of the world. Some researchers argue that entire networks of ancient habitation remain undiscovered beneath sand seas too vast to survey completely. Others are more cautious, warning that popular imagination often transforms ordinary ruins into mythical lost civilizations. The evidence remains incomplete, and deserts encourage exaggeration as much as discovery. But there is one detail that continues to trouble archaeologists. Certain ruins appear in places where cities should not exist at all. Far beyond reliable rivers, deep inside regions now almost completely without rainfall, isolated from stable agriculture, these locations seem irrational by modern standards, and yet traces of long-term occupation are undeniably present. The people who lived there must have possessed sophisticated knowledge of water, seasonal movement, trade logistics, and survival in extreme environments. Their worlds depended on balances that could easily collapse. A single drying river can destroy a kingdom. A shift in trade routes can empty a city within decades. Several years of failed rains can begin a chain reaction that no ruler can stop. The desert is patient enough to erase the aftermath. Some of the earliest modern expeditions searching for buried desert settlements begin not with archaeology but with rumour. Colonial officers hear stories from caravan traders. Surveyors mapping remote regions encounter unexplained stone alignments. Pilots flying over vast dunes report strange rectangular shadows visible from the air under certain conditions. In the 20th century, explorers become increasingly convinced that parts of the desert conceal far more history than anyone previously suspected. Many searches fail completely. Teams spend months excavating natural formations mistaken for ruins. Ancient campsites turn out to be relatively recent. Folklore leads investigators toward empty stretches of sand where nothing survives at all. The desert consumes time and confidence with equal efficiency. Equipment breaks, water disappears, vehicles become trapped. Sandstorms erase excavation trenches overnight. Even today, many suspected sites remain inaccessible for most of the year, and still the search continues, because every so often the desert gives something back. A carved stone surface emerges from a dune face after heavy wind exposure. Human remains appear in regions now completely abandoned. A buried wall retains fingerprints pressed into drying mud thousands of years ago. Archaeologists uncover storage chambers still containing seeds from extinct local plant varieties. In some places, entire neighborhoods survive beneath layers of sand that protected them from weather and looting alike. The irony is difficult to ignore. The same desert that destroys civilizations can also preserve them. Dry air slows decay. Sand seals structures away from oxygen and moisture. Organic materials that would rot elsewhere sometimes survive for astonishing lengths of time in arid conditions. Textiles, wood, basketry, even human hair can remain intact for centuries or longer. The desert acts both as executioner and archivist. That contradiction lies at the heart of the buried city mystery. Something terrible must happen for an urban centre to disappear so completely. Cities are stubborn things. Even after collapse, they usually leave scars on the landscape roads, debris fields, broken foundations, layers of occupation. Yet some desert settlements seem to fade almost entirely from visible existence. Their names vanish from maps, their buildings sink below dunes, their histories fragment into myth. It becomes possible for later civilizations to cross directly over them without realizing what lies underneath. Perhaps that is why stories of forbidden cities emerge so often in arid regions. Not because every legend is true, but because deserts genuinely hide things. Entire landscapes disappear beneath moving sand. Ancient coastlines become invisible. River systems vanish underground. Human memory loses its anchors when geography itself changes shape. And somewhere beneath one of these immense expanses, according to evidence scattered across centuries, there may still be a city waiting in darkness under the dunes. Not untouched, not frozen in time, but sleeping beneath layers of wind-blown earth that continue shifting above it every day. The silence of the desert makes that possibility feel strangely believable, because out there, beyond the last permanent wells and the final marked roads, there are still places where the ground has not fully given up its secrets. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. If this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy, the search for the buried city begins long before archaeologists arrive with satellite imagery and excavation grids. It begins with older memories, with roots that no longer exist, with landscapes transformed so completely that modern observers struggle to imagine what came before. To understand how an entire forbidden city could vanish beneath the desert, it becomes necessary to look backward into a world that no longer resembles the one seen today, a world where the desert itself was alive. Long before the dunes took command of the horizon, the land was not empty. It is difficult to imagine this while standing in the modern desert, where the sun hardens the air and the ground seems hostile to almost every form of life. The mind resists the idea that such a place could once have held water in abundance, that grasses could have rippled where sand now moves, that animals could have crossed open plains where nothing larger than a lizard now leaves tracks. Yet geology is full of landscapes that have changed beyond recognition, and the great deserts of the world are among the most dramatic reminders that climate is not a background condition. It is an active force, shaping where people can live, what they can build, what they remember, and what they lose. Across North Africa, Arabia, Central Asia, and the margins of the great inland basins, researchers have found evidence of older wet periods when today's deserts supported lakes, marshes, rivers, and seasonal grazing lands. The details vary from region to region, and scholars still debate the exact timing and local effects of these climatic shifts. But the wider pattern is clear. Many deserts have not always been deserts. They have expanded, contracted, softened, and hardened over thousands of years. In some periods, monsoon systems reached farther north. In others, rainfall belts shifted away. Ancient river channels carried water through places that now receive only brief, violent storms. Lakes filled basins that later cracked into salt flats. Human beings followed those waters with patience, skill, and a memory for routes that could mean the difference between survival and death. The world of the buried city begins in that older landscape. It may have stood near an oasis, or beside a seasonal river, or along the edge of a basin where groundwater rose close enough to the surface for wells. It may have depended on floods that came predictably enough to support fields, date palms, gardens, and herds. What survives in the record suggests that people in arid and semi-arid lands often built astonishingly flexible systems around uncertainty. They did not need a land to be lush in the modern sense. They needed water to appear in the right places at the right times, and they needed the knowledge to store it, direct it, and defend it. A desert city is never only a city, it is a machine for managing scarcity. Its streets, walls, wells, cisterns, canals, reservoirs, and fields all belong to the same fragile design. A settlement can rise where outsiders see only emptiness if its people understand underground water, seasonal grazing, long-distance exchange, and the social discipline required to protect limited resources. The less obvious the water, the more powerful the people who control it can become. In some desert societies, a well is not merely a convenience, it is a border, a treasury, a shrine, and a weapon. This may be why later traditions remember the city as forbidden. Places built around scarce water often develop strict rules about access. Outsiders cannot simply wander in. Caravans may be allowed to approach only along certain routes. Traders may be searched, taxed, or confined to specific quarters. Sacred enclosures may remain closed to everyone but priests, rulers, or hereditary guardians. If the city sits at the meeting point of trade and survival, secrecy itself becomes a form of protection. The environment that made such a city possible would have been richer than the modern landscape, but not necessarily gentle. There may have been grasslands on the margins, scattered trees in wadis, reed beds around pools, and animals drawn to permanent or seasonal water. Wild gazelles, antelope, ostriches, and smaller game could have moved across the open country. Herding communities may have passed nearby with goats, sheep, cattle, or camels, depending on the region and period. Migratory birds would have stopped at wetlands that later vanished. At night, the city's outskirts might have carried the sounds of insects, animals, wind, and water moving through channels. One lesser-known detail of desert archaeology is how often water leaves ghostly fingerprints after it disappears. Ancient lake beds can be traced through shorelines etched into hillsides. Dry river channels appear from the air as dark or pale ribbons cutting across the terrain. Fossil pollen preserved in sediments can reveal plants that no longer grow there. Shells of freshwater mollusks turn up in places where no freshwater exists today. Chemical signatures in cave formations, lake deposits, and buried soils can record wet and dry phases with surprising precision. The desert may seem mute, but it stores climate history in stone, salt, dust, and bone. For the people who first settled around the buried city's water source, these long-term patterns would have been invisible. They did not think in terms of millennia of climate movement. They thought in terms of rains that came or failed, herds that survived or died, wells that deepened or turned bitter. A region could remain habitable for generations, long enough for people to believe it had always been so. Children born beside a lake do not imagine that their grandchildren may walk across its dry bed. Farmers planting near a seasonal flood do not necessarily see the first signs of a climate system shifting beyond recovery. And yet small changes accumulate. A wet season begins later, a river runs weaker, pasture retreats from the outer valleys, wells require deeper shafts, fields closest to the settlement remain productive, but distant ones fail. Herding groups press nearer to cultivated land. Caravan routes adjust toward more reliable water. No single year announces the end. Instead, the world tightens. At its height, however, the city's landscape may have seemed secure. It may have stood as proof that people could defeat the desert through organization and skill. Water could be drawn from beneath the earth and lifted into gardens. Floods could be captured behind embankments. Channels could carry life into fields beyond the natural reach of streams. Storage rooms could hold grain through lean seasons. Watchtowers could monitor roads and grazing lands. Markets could concentrate goods from regions far beyond the horizon. This mixture of danger and abundance gives desert cities their unusual power. They sit between worlds. To one side lies cultivated order, with walls, rituals, ledgers, workshops, and planned streets. To the other lies mobility, with caravans, herders, raiders, guides, and people who know how to read dunes like written signs. A city buried under the desert would have depended on both. It could not survive as a sealed palace of stone. It needed movement. It needed those who crossed the empty spaces and returned with salt, incense, metals, textiles, animals, stories, warnings, and news of distant rulers. In time, such a place could become more than a settlement. It could become a threshold. Caravans arriving after days or weeks in the open desert would see its palms first, then its towers, then perhaps its walls rising from a haze of dust. The sight of green would feel almost unreal. Date groves would mark the presence of water. Smoke from cooking fires would drift above rooftops. Animals would smell the wells before humans saw them. Traders would unload goods under the supervision of officials. Scribes or tax collectors might record quantities in systems that only partly survive. If they survive at all, priests might bless water, rulers might claim descent from founders, and ordinary families would build lives around routines as intimate as any in a river valley or coastal town. The evidence remains incomplete, but comparable sites show how dense and layered these communities could be. Desert settlements often include more than monumental buildings. They contain hearths, storage jars, grinding stones, children's toys, animal pens, repair areas, discarded sandals, beads, combs, spindle whorls, broken cooking pots, and ash heaps filled with the remains of daily meals. These modest traces matter because they pull the city out of legend. They remind us that a vanished place was not built only by kings and priests. It was maintained by people carrying water, sweeping courtyards, baking bread, mending walls, tending animals, arguing over prices, and watching the sky for signs of rain. That human ordinariness is easy to lose when a city becomes a mystery. The phrase forbidden city suggests hidden chambers, royal secrets, and deliberate concealment. Those things may have existed, but before the city was forbidden, before it was buried, before it became a rumour attached to a dangerous stretch of desert, it was a living environment shaped by practical needs. Its first mystery is not why it vanished. Its first mystery is how it endured at all. The answer begins with water, but it does not end there. Water alone does not make a city. It must be organized into power. It must be measured, shared, taxed, defended, and sometimes withheld. It must be tied to belief, labor, hierarchy, and memory. Once that happens, an oasis can become a capital, a caravan stop can become a sanctuary, and a settlement on the desert's edge can become a place outsiders approach with caution. The living desert gives the city its first breath. Human ambition gives it walls. The first walls do not rise because the city is afraid. They rise because the city has something worth enclosing. In the beginning, the settlement may have been modest, a cluster of dwellings gathered around dependable water, a place where herders came during dry months and traders stopped before crossing more dangerous ground. Its earliest buildings might have been low and practical, shaped from mud brick, stone, timber, reed, or whatever the landscape provided. Nothing about such a beginning announces future legend. Many ancient cities begin this way, not as grand designs, but as repeated decisions. A family stays through one season, then another. A well is deepened, A storehouse is built. A track becomes a road because enough feet and hooves choose the same direction. A market day becomes a custom. A shrine becomes a destination. A leader becomes a ruler because control over water and grain slowly becomes control over people. The hidden capital emerges from this accumulation. Its rise is not merely a story of wealth, it is a story of position. The city stands where roots converge, or where roots must pause because water demands it. Anyone crossing the surrounding land has to calculate distance from well to well, pasture to pasture, shade to shade. In such a world, geography becomes authority. A city that controls the safest water in a difficult region can tax movement without needing to conquer every mile of desert around it. It can charge caravans for access, sell fodder, repair animals, exchange goods, and gather information from every direction. News arrives tied to saddlebags. Rumours come with spices, copper, ivory, incense, lapis, silk, salt, dates, grain, and cloth. The city learns the moods of distant kingdoms because merchants talk while waiting for their animals to drink. Over generations, this power hardens into institutions. Wells become supervised, gates become guarded, storage rooms become administrative centres, sacred places grow larger, and rituals around water, fertility, protection, and royal legitimacy deepen. What survives in the record from comparable desert societies suggests that rulers often link themselves to the ability to preserve life in hostile landscapes. A king who keeps the canals flowing is not simply efficient. He appears favoured. A priesthood that knows when floods may come or how to bless the wells does not merely perform ceremony. It helps bind uncertainty into a system people can endure. This is where the forbidden quality may begin, not with total secrecy, but with layers of access. The outer settlement may be busy, noisy, and open to controlled trade, while the inner city remains restricted. There may be quarters where foreigners can sleep, markets where they can bargain, courtyards where officials inspect goods, and temples or palaces where they cannot enter. A traveller might see the walls, the gates, the towers, the dust rising from streets, perhaps even the glitter of something precious above a roofline, but still leave knowing very little about what lies at the centre. Over time, partial knowledge becomes myth. Places glimpsed but not understood are fertile ground for exaggeration. The city's rulers may have encouraged that ambiguity. A protected image is often more powerful than a fully visible one. If outsiders believe the city contains sacred chambers, hidden archives, royal tombs, or guarded treasures, the belief itself becomes part of its defense. Sometimes fear protects better than stone. Sometimes reverence does the same work as an army. The evidence remains incomplete, but many ancient societies used controlled visibility to define power. Processions could show the ruler at certain moments while keeping the machinery of rule concealed. Temples could open outer courts while hiding inner sanctuaries. Palaces could display wealth in reception halls while masking private corridors, archives, and storerooms. A city buried under the desert might therefore have been forbidden in a practical sense long before it became lost in a legendary one. Its inner spaces may have belonged only to certain families, priestly groups, palace officials, military commanders, or initiated workers. Its plans may have been designed to slow movement, direct visitors, and separate public activity from sacred or administrative cores. The most valuable thing inside may not have been treasure at all. It may have been knowledge routes, treaties, water rights, astronomical observations, tax records, genealogies, storage inventories, and agreements with tribes whose cooperation kept the city alive. A lesser-known truth about ancient capitals is that their power often depends on paperwork as much as monuments. Clay tablets, ostraca, wooden slips, papyrus, parchment, knotted cords, seal impressions, and painted marks on jars all serve the same broad purpose. They turn memory into administration. A city managing caravans, wells, fields, herds, labour, and tribute cannot rely only on personal memory. It needs records, even where writing is absent or limited. Accounting systems emerge because power must track what it claims. If such archives existed in the buried city, they may be gone, destroyed by fire, decay, looting, or time, or they may survive in fragments, sealed beneath sand where dry conditions sometimes protect fragile materials with almost unnatural patience. Scholars still debate the chances of finding archives in many desert sites because preservation depends on small accidents, the chemistry of the soil, the depth of burial, the presence of insects, the speed of abandonment. The materials used for writing, a single sealed room can transform understanding. A single broken seal can reveal a name otherwise lost to history. At the height of its growth, the city would have required constant labour. The romantic image of a hidden desert capital often overlooks the amount of work needed to keep such a place alive. Channels silt up, wells collapse, roofs need repair after rare but violent rains. Walls crack in heat, storage jars break, animals consume enormous amounts of fodder, guards must be fed, officials must be paid, fields must be planted, harvested, and protected. If windblown sand begins accumulating near outer structures, people have to clear it away again and again. A city can resist the desert only by working against it daily. This creates a social order shaped by necessity. Farmers, potters, masons, water carriers, scribes, guards, priests, traders, guides, and servants all depend on one another, but not equally. Those who control access to water and storage can command obedience. Those who understand desert routes possess dangerous independence. Those who build and maintain the water system may hold knowledge too important to ignore. The city is not a simple pyramid of power. It is a web of dependence held together by need, ritual, force, and habit. Its wealth may have been real, but unevenly distributed. Elite homes might have contained imported objects, polished stone vessels, metal ornaments, fine textiles, carved ivory, glass beads, or painted ceramics brought from far away. Common households may have lived with far less, though even modest objects can reveal wide connections. A broken bead made from a distant mineral, a shard of pottery in a foreign style, or the bone of an animal not native to the immediate region can show that the city was not isolated. It was hidden only in the sense that the desert made access difficult. Economically, it may have been deeply connected. This contrast is essential. A forbidden city is not necessarily a lonely city. It can be secretive and cosmopolitan at the same time. Its rulers can limit entry while depending on goods from distant coasts, mountains, river valleys, and steppe lands. Its people can speak multiple languages in the markets while preserving strict rules around sacred spaces. Foreign coins or seals can pass through its outer quarters while local rituals remain closed. The city's identity forms through contact and control together. As it rises, its physical appearance changes. Outer settlements thicken, defensive works expand, roads become more formal, cemeteries spread along ridges or beyond cultivated land, workshops cluster where smoke, smell, and noise can be managed. Temples or palace compounds dominate higher ground if the terrain allows it. Water installations become more elaborate, because every stage of growth increases demand. The city's rulers may present this expansion as permanence. Walls are meant to suggest endurance. Gateways declare order. Monumental architecture tells visitors that the city is not temporary, not merely a camp made larger, but a centre of the world in its own right. And yet its permanence is always conditional. Every stone depends on water, every ritual depends on harvests or trade, every caravan depends on routes remaining safe, every ruler depends on forces beyond the palace walls. In the city's golden age, these vulnerabilities may be hidden beneath ceremony and wealth. The markets are full, the wells are guarded, the walls cast long shadows in the afternoon light, the inner precinct remains closed to most eyes, deepening the sense that something powerful lives at the centre. But the desert is never truly defeated. It waits at the edge of every road, every field, every garden and every wall. It collects in corners. It piles against outer buildings. It tests neglected channels. It creeps into abandoned rooms first as dust, then as drifts, then as weight. The people of the city know this. They sweep it away, build against it, curse it, measure it, and live with it. For now, the city is strong enough. For now, its gates control the horizon. The walls do more than keep danger out. They teach everyone who approaches the city how to behave. From a distance, the outer defences may appear blunt and practical, a hard line of human intention set against a landscape that refuses straight edges. But the closer a traveller comes, the more the walls begin to speak in the language of power. They decide where a caravan slows, where animals gather, where guards can watch, where dust settles, where strangers wait, and where the city reveals only as much of itself as it chooses. A wall is stone, mud brick, timber, packed earth, or some combination of all these things, but it is also a rule made visible. The city's forbidden character depends on that visibility. It does not need to be completely hidden to feel unreachable. In fact, part of its force may come from being seen but not entered. The towers may rise above the desert plain. The upper roofs may catch the last red light of evening. Smoke may drift from kitchens and workshops. Palm crowns may move inside the enclosure where water feeds them. Yet the most important spaces remain unseen. Gates control the angle of entry. Narrow passages bend movement. Courtyards interrupt direct access. Inner walls separate one kind of visitor from another. The city is not a single enclosed place, but a sequence of permissions. This kind of planning appears in many ancient urban centres, though the details differ across regions and eras. A city does not need a modern blueprint to create hierarchy through space. It only needs repeated decisions made over time: who may enter by which gate, who may approach the well, who may trade in the market, who may sleep inside the walls, who must remain outside after sunset, who may pass into the temple precinct, who may cross the palace threshold. Over generations, such decisions become architecture. Streets narrow where control is needed. Open courts expand where inspection is useful. Elevated platforms create visibility for rulers or priests. Dead ends and turns limit the movement of strangers. What survives in the record suggests that urban design often preserves social boundaries long after the names of the people who enforce them are gone. The outer city may have been the loudest and least mysterious part. There the life of the settlement pressed against practical needs. Animals complained in holding pens. Porters unloaded sacks and jars. Traders argued over weights, measures, and taxes. Officials examined goods and perhaps marked them with seals. Water sellers, stable keepers, cooks, guides, guards, and labourers moved through crowded spaces where the smell of dung, sweat, smoke, leather, and spices mixed with dust. If foreign merchants were allowed in, this is where they likely spent most of their time, close enough to benefit from the city's protection, but far from its heart. The inner city would have felt different. There, movement slowed. Surfaces became cleaner, more formal, more deliberate. The architecture may have been arranged around courtyards, halls, ritual platforms, storage chambers, and residences belonging to elites or priestly families. There may have been painted plaster, carved doorways, polished thresholds, drainage channels, shaded colonnades, or raised floors to protect against rare floods and drifting sand. A desert city, if wealthy enough, often spends resources not only on defense but on contrast. It creates coolness where the outer world burns. It creates shade where the horizon offers none. It makes water visible in basins, channels, or gardens, because visible water in a dry land is not merely pleasant, it is propaganda. A surprising detail from arid zone archaeology is that small water features can carry enormous symbolic weight. A pool, a fountain, a lined basin, or even a carefully plastered cistern may represent more than engineering. It can declare that the ruling order has turned chaos into abundance. In places where most people measure water by skin, jar, or ration, the sight of water held calmly in stone becomes almost theatrical. It says that the city has mastered what everyone else fears losing. Still, scholars still debate how much monumental water architecture existed in many lost desert settlements, especially where excavation remains limited. The evidence is often fragmentary. A channel may be ritual, domestic, agricultural, or defensive. A basin may have held water, grain, dye, or something else entirely. A room interpreted as sacred by one researcher may be understood as administrative by another. Desert preservation can be astonishing, but it does not always preserve meaning. Buildings survive more easily than the habits that animated them. The sacred precinct, if one existed, may have formed the deepest layer of restriction. Ancient cities often place their gods, ancestors, royal cults, or protective spirits at the center of public order. In a desert environment, those powers might be tied to springs, wells, storms, stars, mountains, fertility, trade, or the dead. The temple could serve as a religious center, a storehouse, a bank, a record office, and a political theatre all at once. Offerings might arrive from households and caravans alike. Precious goods could be deposited there not simply as devotion, but as a way of binding distant traders and local elites into a shared system of obligation. Access to such places was rarely equal. Some people might approach outer altars or courtyards. Others might leave offerings at a threshold. Only a few could enter the innermost chambers. The forbidden quality of the city would deepen if its most important rituals occurred out of sight. Outsiders would hear drums, bells, chanting, or processional movement without understanding what was happening. They might glimpse torchlight against walls at night, or see smoke rising from enclosed courts. Partial perception is often more powerful than full knowledge. The palace, too, if the city had one, would be a controlled world within a controlled world. It may not have resembled the vast imperial palaces familiar from later capitals, but even a smaller administrative residence could concentrate power. There would be rooms for receiving visitors, rooms for storing tribute, rooms for keeping records, rooms where household labour unfolded invisibly behind elite display. There may have been guards posted not only to stop attack but to regulate status. In such environments, where a person stands matters. Who sits, who waits, who speaks first, who is searched, who is offered water, who is refused shade, all of it belongs to the grammar of authority. No single explanation fully accounts for why later memory might call the city forbidden, but architecture offers one likely answer. A place can become forbidden through repeated exclusion. It can become forbidden because its centre is sacred, because its rulers fear spies, because its water must be protected, because foreigners are useful but dangerous, because burial grounds are taboo, because archives contain secrets, because political legitimacy depends on controlling what people see. Over time, practical restrictions gather spiritual weight. Rules become tradition. Tradition becomes warning. Warning becomes legend. The dead may have contributed to this aura as much as the living. Ancient cemeteries often form invisible boundaries around cities. Tombs, burial mounds, rock-cut chambers, or simple grave fields can mark ancestral claims to land. In desert regions, graves sometimes survive with haunting clarity because dryness protects bones, textiles, mats, and wooden objects. The dead may lie outside the walls along ridges, near roads, or in separate sacred zones, placed where travellers could see that the city's roots extended beyond the living generation. A community surrounded by its ancestors is harder to dismiss as temporary. It belongs to the land because it has buried its memory there. But burial places are also vulnerable to fear. Later travellers may avoid them. Grave goods attract looters. Disturbed tombs produce stories of curses, guardian spirits, and misfortune. In some lost desert cities, the first visible ruins rediscovered by outsiders are not houses or markets but tombs, because burial monuments often stand on higher ground. If the city's living spaces sink beneath sand while tomb markers remain exposed, later observers may imagine the whole place as a land of the dead. That perception can reinforce the idea that entry is dangerous. Inside the walls, life continues in ordinary patterns, and this ordinariness matters. Children play in courtyards. Women and men grind grain, mend cloth, shape clay, repair tools, prepare food, carry water, and tend animals. Apprentices learn crafts in workshops thick with dust and smoke. Scribes or accountants scratch marks onto whatever material their culture uses for memory. Guards grow bored at gates. Priests manage rituals with the practical attention of people responsible for doing the same thing correctly many times. The Forbidden City, in its living years, is not mysterious to those who belong there. It is home. That is one of the strangest transformations time performs. A place that later generations fear to enter was once full of people annoyed by heat, debt, neighbours, insects, broken jars, stubborn animals, and officials demanding payment. The great mystery is built from countless ordinary days. And still, the walls remain. They frame the difference between belonging and exclusion. They turn water into a guarded privilege. They protect the stores that keep famine away. They keep sacred knowledge in the hands of those authorized to handle it. They give the city a face turned outward toward the desert, stern and watchful, while hiding its inner life behind layers of mud brick and shadow. For a time, that system works. The city grows more confident in its separations. Outsiders carry away stories shaped by frustration and awe. Some call it wealthy, some call it holy, some call it dangerous. Some insist no one may enter its heart and return unchanged. The walls do not deny these stories. They help create them. Beyond the walls, The city belongs to movement. Its forbidden heart may be guarded, its inner courts hidden, its wells watched by officials and its sacred rooms closed to most eyes. But no desert city survives by shutting itself away from the world completely. The walls protect it, the roads feed it, long before dawn, before heat thickens the air and turns every distant shape uncertain. Caravans gather at the edge of habitation like slow, breathing organisms. Camels or donkeys kneel beneath loads. Drivers check ropes and leather straps. Guides study wind, stars, dunes, and memory. Guards count weapons. Traders measure water in skins and jars with the seriousness of people measuring time itself. The city's gates may decide who enters, but the desert decides who arrives. A caravan route is not a line in the modern sense. It is a chain of survivable decisions. One well leads to another. One dry valley offers easier footing than a field of soft dunes. A ridge gives direction when landmarks vanish. A seasonal pasture allows animals to recover. A salt flat may be crossed quickly in winter but avoided after rain. Routes shift depending on politics, weather, tribal agreements, and the condition of water points. What later maps draw as clean paths were in life. Flexible corridors of risk. A good guide did not merely know where to go, he knew when not to go. The buried city's importance would have rested on this knowledge. It may have stood near a junction where caravans from different ecological worlds met farmers from river valleys, herders from open steppe or desert margins, miners from uplands, sailors' goods moving inland from coasts, pilgrims heading towards sacred landscapes, soldiers following imperial commands, envoys carrying fragile messages across unfriendly ground. The city transformed movement into revenue. Every arrival brought opportunity. Every departure carried its reputation outward. To an exhausted traveller, the first sight of the city would have been intensely physical, not a symbol, not a mystery, but relief. A darker line on the horizon, a cluster of palms, the glint of plaster or stone, the smell of animals and smoke, the promise of shade, the sound of human voices after days of wind. Approaching caravans might slow long before the gate, because entry itself required order. Animals had to be counted, loads inspected, taxes negotiated, weapons possibly surrendered or registered. Outsiders may have been directed toward caravanserais, open yards, or walled compounds where they could rest without wandering freely into the city's protected core. This arrangement gave the city a double personality. Inside, hierarchy and restriction. Outside, exchange and improvisation. The outer quarters likely held languages, accents, clothing styles, religious practices, and goods from places most inhabitants would never see. A trader might bring lapis from distant mountains, incense from southern coasts, copper ingots, dyed cloth, carved ivory, medicinal resins, salt, leather, grain, dates, wine, oils, ceramics, or animals bred for endurance. Some objects would pass through quickly, others would stay and become part of local life. A bead lost in a courtyard, a coin dropped near a gate, a foreign jar broken in a storage room. These modest accidents are the kinds of evidence archaeologists later used to reconstruct forgotten networks. One surprising detail of ancient trade is how far small objects can travel without their owners ever making the full journey. A shell from a distant sea may pass through 10 hands before reaching an inland market. A stone bead may move from quarry to workshop to merchant to caravan to household to grave. The final owner may know little about its origin. Yet the object quietly records the existence of a chain stretching across deserts, mountains, and ports in a buried city. Such items become tiny witnesses against isolation. They reveal that even guarded places were connected to enormous worlds. But connection also brings danger. Caravans carry wealth, and wealth attracts violence. A city that profits from trade must manage relationships with those who control the spaces between settlements, nomadic confederations, clan groups, armed guides, raiders, imperial patrols, rival towns, and desert specialists who know how to disappear where city soldiers cannot easily follow. The people of the road may be viewed by settled elites as unruly or threatening, but the city depends on them. They know water points beyond official reach. They understand weather signs. They can lead caravans safely or lead enemies toward hidden approaches. They can protect trade, tax it, ignore it, or destroy it. Scholars still debate how formal these relationships were in many desert societies, because the evidence often survives unevenly. Written records, where they exist, tend to preserve the viewpoint of rulers, tax collectors, or foreign observers, not necessarily the voices of guides and herders. Archaeology adds another layer, but not always a simple one. A campsite may be hard to date. A scatter of pottery may represent trade, seasonal movement, military patrol, or brief refuge. What survives in the record suggests a constant negotiation between settled and mobile communities, not a clean division between civilization and wilderness. The Forbidden City may have owed much of its survival to such negotiations. Its rulers might have offered payments, marriage alliances, protection agreements, market privileges, or ritual honors to groups beyond the walls. Caravans may have needed escorts through dangerous stretches. Certain wells may have belonged by custom to particular families or tribes. A guide's authority might come not from palace appointment, but from inherited knowledge and personal reputation. In such a world, the map of power is invisible to outsiders. A traveller sees sand. Local people see rights, memories, debts, warnings, and boundaries. The city's market would have turned these invisible networks into visible life. There, the guarded centre met the moving world, scales, seals, ropes, jars, baskets, scribes, animals, and shouted negotiations formed the daily machinery of exchange. Spices and resins scented the air. Metal workers repaired fittings and tools. Leather workers patched saddles and water bags. Bakers supplied travellers who had eaten dried provisions for too long. Healers treated infected feet, animal wounds, fever, and exhaustion. Religious specialists offered blessings before departures, because every caravan leaving the gate accepted that some members might not return. Pilgrims may have added another layer to the city's importance. If a shrine, oracle, tomb, sacred spring, or ritual calendar was associated with the settlement, people might endure the crossing for reasons beyond trade. Sacred geography often turns difficult landscapes into destinations. A dangerous journey can become part of devotion. The harder the approach, the more powerful the arrival may feel. In that case, the city's forbidden reputation would deepen. A place could be both closed and magnetic, restricting access while attracting those who believed proximity to its sacred centre mattered. Soldiers and envoys would have seen the city differently. For empires, desert capitals and oasis towns were strategic anchors. They could secure borders, monitor movement, supply campaigns, shelter garrisons, or serve as diplomatic meeting points with groups beyond direct state control. A ruler who held the city could claim influence across a wider desert corridor. A rival who captured or bypassed it could redirect trade and prestige. Thus, the city's walls were never only local defences. They were statements within larger political landscapes. Yet politics on the desert edge can change quickly. A safer route discovered elsewhere can weaken a city without a battle. A new alliance can draw caravans away. A rival oasis can offer lower taxes. A conflict between groups controlling wells can make an old road too dangerous. A distant empire's collapse can remove the demand for certain goods. A port silting up, a mine closing, or a dynasty falling hundreds of miles away can ripple through the market of a city that never sees the sea. The mine, or the palace where decisions are made. No single explanation fully accounts for the rise or fall of trade cities because their lives are tied to systems larger than themselves. For now, however, the caravans still come. They arrive with dust in their hair and cracked lips, with animals worn thin and goods wrapped against sand. They enter under supervision, bringing news that the city absorbs like water. They speak of kings, wars, marriages, taxes, storms, bandits, new roads, failed wells, generous hosts, ruined towns, strange omens, and profitable markets. Some stories are true, some are polished by distance, some become part of the legends that later surround the city itself. The people inside the walls listen carefully because rumour is intelligence before it becomes entertainment. In the evening, after the day's heat loosens and shadows lengthen from the walls, the caravan yards settle into a restless quiet. Animals chew or groan. Fires burn low. Traders guard their goods. Guides speak softly about the next crossing. Above them, the city's inner roofs remain dark and inaccessible, holding whatever ceremonies, records, or secrets make outsiders whisper. Beyond them, the desert waits without concern. The city appears strong in these moments, seated at the meeting place of scarcity and movement, but the very roads that enrich it also expose its vulnerability. A city dependent on caravans must trust that the world beyond its walls will continue to send them. It must trust that wells will hold, alliances will endure, routes will remain passable, and demand will survive in distant lands. For a long time, those trusts are rewarded. Then, almost imperceptibly, the pattern begins to change. The first signs of decline are easy to miss because they do not look like disaster. A city does not usually fall silent in a single moment. It begins with smaller absences. A caravan arrives late and explains that a well on the northern road has gone brackish. A merchant complains that fewer buyers are waiting at the farm market. A herding family asks permission to graze closer to cultivated land because pasture beyond the outer ridges has failed. A tax official notices that grain stores are lower than expected. A mason is ordered to repair a cracked cistern wall for the third time in a season. None of these things, by itself, proves that the world is changing. Ancient cities are accustomed to difficulty. Droughts come and go. Trade fluctuates. Roads become dangerous and then safe again. People endure more than later historians sometimes imagine. But patterns matter. If the rains fail once, the city can open reserves. If they fail again, the reserves shrink. If a third weak season follows, debts grow, animals weaken, and families begin making choices they once avoided. Fields farther from reliable water are abandoned first. Wells must be deepened. Canal channels require more labour for less reward. The city's rulers may demand stricter control over water distribution, which preserves order for some and breeds resentment among others. The poor feel change first because they have the least margin. The wealthy can store grain, buy animals, pay for guards, and leave temporarily if necessary. The people who carry water, clear sand, repair walls, and harvest marginal fields experience decline not as a historical process, but as exhaustion. Climate stress rarely acts alone. It presses against weaknesses already present. The city's survival depends on a delicate arrangement between water, authority, trade, labour, and trust. When one part weakens, the others must compensate. If water becomes scarce, officials become more severe. If officials become more severe, communities may resist. If trade declines, the city has less wealth to maintain its systems. If maintenance fails, water becomes harder to manage. The chain tightens quietly before it breaks. What survives in the record from ancient desert settlements often shows this kind of pressure indirectly. Archaeologists may find repaired walls built with poorer materials than earlier phases. Storage buildings may change use. Imported goods may become rarer. Animal bones may show a shift toward hardier species. Pollen and sediment evidence may suggest declining vegetation. Human remains, where ethically studied and clearly dated, may reveal nutritional stress, disease, or increased physical labour. These clues rarely form a neat story, and scholars still debate how to connect environmental evidence with social change. A dry century does not automatically destroy a city. People adapt. The question is how much adaptation their institutions can bear. The city's rulers might respond with projects meant to prove control. New wells, deeper cisterns, longer channels, stricter gates, more guards on storage rooms, expanded rituals asking for rain or protection. Public works can be genuine solutions, but they are also performances of confidence. In a time of uncertainty, visible construction reassures the population that authority still functions. The problem is that such projects require labour precisely when ordinary people may already be strained. At the same time, the desert begins to press closer. Sand is not an army, but it can behave like one over long periods. It advances through accumulation. It gathers against abandoned walls, fills neglected courtyards, clogs channels, buries field boundaries, and changes the way wind moves around buildings. In a healthy city, workers clear it, redirect it, build barriers, repair damage, and keep streets open. In a weakening city, maintenance becomes selective. Important roads remain passable while side alleys fill. Elite quarters are protected while outer districts decline. Fields closest to the water are saved while marginal land disappears beneath dust and scrub. The city does not vanish at once. It contracts. A lesser-known detail of urban decline is that abandonment can be partial for a long time. Later imagination pictures a city empty suddenly, with doors left open and meals abandoned on tables. That does happen in some catastrophic cases, but many settlements fade unevenly. One quarter is deserted while another remains occupied. Workshops move closer to secure water. Outer families dismantle their own houses to reuse bricks elsewhere. Cemeteries remain active after neighborhoods shrink. Temples may continue receiving offerings long after administrative power weakens. A city can be dying and still feel alive to those inside it. The caravans notice. Traders are practical observers. They count risk. If an old route becomes unreliable, they search for another. If taxes rise too high, they avoid a city when possible. If wells fail, no amount of tradition can keep traffic moving along the same path. The city's market may remain busy for a while, but the flow changes. Fewer luxury goods arrive. More local barter replaces long-distance exchange. Guides speak cautiously about routes that were once routine. News from the outer world becomes less reassuring. A rival settlement may be gaining favour. A new power may be securing a different corridor. A conflict at a distant border may interrupt demand for goods that once enriched the city. The rulers may interpret this as disloyalty. They may increase taxes to compensate for falling revenue, making the city less attractive still. They may send patrols beyond their effective reach. They may punish local groups accused of diverting caravans. They may try to force old patterns back into place. But trade, like water, follows channels of least resistance. Once movement begins to bend around a city, walls cannot easily command it back. Political pressure adds another layer. A desert capital that once thrived by balancing larger powers may find itself exposed when those powers change. Empires rise and fall beyond the horizon. Border zones shift. Armies demand supplies. Refugees arrive. Local elites compete for control over shrinking resources. The city's forbidden inner world, once a source of awe, may become a source of suspicion. Who controls the wells? Who has access to grain? Who decides which caravan is protected and which is taxed heavily in hard times? Secrecy can turn from strength into liability. The evidence remains incomplete, but many ancient collapses show the same uncomfortable pattern. Environmental stress becomes political stress, and political stress becomes social fracture. People do not simply suffer drought, they suffer decisions made during drought. They do not merely endure scarcity, they endure unequal scarcity. If the sacred precinct continues to receive offerings while common households reduce meals, resentment grows. If palace stores remain sealed while outer districts empty, loyalty thins. If guards protect elite water channels while ordinary wells fail, the city's moral order begins to crack. And yet collapse is not inevitable. Some cities survive severe droughts. Some reorganize, reduce population, shift trade strategies, deepen wells, renegotiate alliances, and endure. The buried city may have done all these things for generations. Its people may have been remarkably resilient. The fact that a settlement existed in such a difficult landscape at all suggests deep practical intelligence. No single explanation fully accounts for its weakening, because decline is rarely one cause. It is a convergence. Perhaps the climate dried faster than institutions could adapt. Perhaps a key trade route moved. Perhaps conflict cut off access to distant goods. Perhaps disease spread through a population already weakened by shortage. Perhaps internal rivalries damaged maintenance of the water system. Perhaps several of these happened together, each making the others worse. The city's final years, if they could be reconstructed, might not look like apocalypse. They might look like argument. Arguments over water, over taxes, over whether to repair an outer wall or abandon it, over whether to send caravans along the old route or risk a new one, over whether the gods had been neglected, whether rulers had failed, whether foreigners had brought misfortune, whether ancestral laws should be restored, whether families should stay or leave before the next dry season. In those arguments, a forbidden city begins to become a vulnerable one. The walls still stand, the gates still open, smoke still rises from rooftops, rituals continue, children are still born, bread is still baked, but the confidence that once held the city together has changed. People begin to notice that the old routines require more effort and bring fewer rewards. They remember years when wells were sweeter, markets fuller, animals stronger, rulers more generous, roads safer. Memory becomes a measure of loss. And beyond the cultivated edge, the desert waits for neglect. It does not need to conquer the city. It only needs people to stop resisting it with the same daily force. A blocked channel left uncleared, a house abandoned, a field not replanted, a gate repaired with weaker timber, a road used less often, a market stall empty for another season. The end approaches not as thunder but as subtraction. When abandonment begins, it may not be called abandonment. People have gentler words for the first stages of leaving. They say they are moving for a season. They say the animals need better pasture. They say a relative in another town has offered work. They say the outer fields are not worth planting this year, but perhaps next year will be different. They leave a few tools behind because returning still seems possible. They seal a storage jar. They cover a doorway. They ask neighbours to watch a house. They carry children, bedding, grain, small valuables, and the objects that make a household portable. What they cannot carry remains in place, waiting for a future that may never arrive. The city does not empty evenly. The poorest quarters may go first, especially those farthest from protected water, almost exposed to drifting sand. Workshops dependent on caravan traffic slow, then close. Potters fire fewer vessels. Metalworkers repair old goods instead of shaping new ones. Market stalls open irregularly. Animals are sold, slaughtered, or driven away. Outer rooms become storage for salvaged materials. Roof beams are removed from abandoned houses because timber is too valuable to waste. Bricks are pried from walls and reused closer to the centre. A dying city feeds on its own edges. Inside the inner precinct, authority tries to preserve the appearance of continuity. Gates are guarded, rituals continue, records, if still kept, may grow more anxious, fewer deliveries, delayed payments, missing labour crews, damaged channels, disputes over wells. What survives in the record from other ancient settlements suggests that administrators often record symptoms without naming collapse. A list of shortages, a complaint over unpaid rations, a repair order. A sudden drop in imported goods, these are not dramatic by themselves, but together they reveal a system tightening around absence. The desert enters through these absences. Dust settles first in unused corners. Sand gathers against low walls where wind loses speed. Courtyards not swept for a few weeks begin to change texture underfoot. A blocked doorway traps a small drift, which grows after the next storm. Roofs weakened by neglect collapse into rooms, creating hollows where sand collects more deeply. Once a building loses its roof, it becomes a basin. The walls that once protected interior life now help hold the desert in place. This is how a city starts to sink. Not all at once, not like a stone dropped into water. It sinks through countless small failures of maintenance. A street becomes difficult to pass. A side alley disappears. A courtyard fills halfway. A storage room becomes inaccessible. A shrine on the edge is visited less often, then only by a few, then not at all. The line between city and desert blurs. Lizards cross thresholds. Foxes den in collapsed rooms. Wind moves freely through houses where families once slept. Scholars still debate whether some buried cities were abandoned suddenly because of violence or disaster, or gradually through environmental and economic decline. The evidence is often ambiguous. A burn layer may signal attack, accident, ritual destruction, or later reuse. Human remains in streets may indicate massacre, disease, or disturbance after burial. A lack of valuables may mean organized departure rather than looting. An abundance of ordinary objects may mean people left in haste, or simply that common items were not worth carrying away. Archaeology is powerful, but it rarely speaks in a single voice. For this city, the stories remember silence more than fire. That does not mean there was no conflict. Declining cities often attract danger. Raiders may test weakened defences. Rival groups may seize wells. Factions may fight over stores. Soldiers may abandon post when payment fails. A final attack could have struck an already diminished place, turning decline into ruin, but no single explanation fully accounts for the image that later survives a city swallowed not merely by enemies, but by the desert itself. If there is violence, the sand covers it. If there is famine, the sand covers that too. If there is last procession leaving through the gate with sacred objects wrapped in cloth, the sand preserves only the track for a little while, then erases it. The desert is impartial. It hides cowardice and courage with the same patience. Those who remain longest are often the people most bound to place. Priests guarding a shrine, families without resources to leave, officials hoping authority will return, labourers tied to obligations, elderly residents who have buried too many generations nearby to imagine another home. For them, abandonment is not strategy. It is grief stretched across seasons. They watch familiar houses close. They hear fewer animals in the morning. They see stars through roofs that once held shade. They remember when strangers filled the market and wonder whether the next caravan will arrive. Then fewer caravans come. A city can survive many things, but not being bypassed. Once the road shifts away, the walls lose meaning. Gates built to regulate movement stand before emptiness. Tax offices have nothing to count. Caravan yards become open spaces where weeds briefly grow after rare rain. The outer markets, once the city's most cosmopolitan zone, become the first places where silence feels permanent. At some point, a decision is made, perhaps by rulers, perhaps by families, perhaps by no one in particular. The city is no longer worth holding at its old scale. The remaining population contracts into a smaller defended area, or moves to a nearby water source, or disperses along safer routes. Sacred objects may be removed. Archives may be burned, buried, carried away, or simply left to decay. Tombs may continue to receive burials for a time, even after the city itself is mostly empty. That lingering attachment can confuse later archaeologists, because a place may remain ritually alive after it has ceased to function as an urban centre. The final departure may leave almost no trace. A gate left partly open, a grinding stone too heavy to move, a child's bead lost in dust, a jar with residue dried along the inner wall, a threshold worn smooth by generations of feet, then never crossed again. The evidence remains incomplete because the most important human decisions are often made without monuments. People leave because staying has become harder than leaving. They do not always know they are ending a civilization's chapter. They are trying to survive the next year. Once regular occupation ends, time changes speed. The first years bring scavenging. Nearby groups may remove beams, stones, doors, metal fittings, and useful pottery. The city becomes a quarry for its own afterlife. Animals move through empty streets. Occasional travellers camp in sheltered rooms. A guide may point to the abandoned walls and warn that the place is unlucky. Children from nearby communities may dare one another to approach. Some rooms collapse quickly. Others stand for centuries. In deserts, ruins can decay slowly in dry air, then vanish rapidly when wind and sand find the right angle. Sand does not simply fall from the sky. It moves like water in slow motion, flowing around obstacles, piling against walls, pouring through openings, spilling down stairways. A doorway becomes a funnel, a sunken room becomes a trap. A street aligned with prevailing winds fills faster than one sheltered by surviving structures. The city's own architecture shapes the way it is buried. What was once design becomes sediment control. Over decades, the lower walls disappear. Rooflines become low ridges, towers break apart, courtyards turn into shallow depressions. Only the tallest or most durable structures remain visible, and even they appear less like buildings than natural mounds. Travellers passing generations later may see nothing but uneven ground. A few stones, perhaps a broken wall after a storm. Without memory, the city becomes landscape. But memory remains. The people who leave carry stories. Their descendants may not remember exact street names or the shape of the inner court, but they remember a forbidden place, a city of walls, a dangerous ruin, a well that failed, a ruler who angered heaven, a treasure chamber no one should open, a road swallowed by sand. Practical history becomes moral tale. Environmental decline becomes punishment. Political failure becomes curse. The long, ordinary process of abandonment becomes a single dramatic event because stories prefer sharp edges. In this way, the buried city survives by becoming less accurate and more powerful. The sand seals its rooms. The wind softens its outlines. The road moves elsewhere. Maps forget it. Empires that once knew its name collapse in turn. Languages change. The forbidden centre, once a controlled space of rulers and priests, becomes forbidden in a different sense, not legally restricted, but feared, haunted, uncertain. People know enough to avoid it, not enough to explain it. And beneath the dunes, the city continues its slow descent into silence. Walls that once ordered human movement now hold layers of sand. Wells fill. Storage rooms darken. Pottery waits in broken heaps. Bones rest under collapsed roofs or in graves whose markers may no longer show. Seeds lie dormant beyond any hope of planting. The desert presses down without anger. By the time outsiders come looking, the city is already half legend. Legends are the second burial. After sand covers the walls, stories cover the city in another layer, softer than sediment but often harder to remove. The abandoned streets vanish from ordinary sight, yet the place does not disappear from human attention. It changes form. It becomes a warning told at night, a name attached to bad luck, a memory of water where there is now dust, a forbidden ground where travellers lower their voices. The city's physical shape dissolves, but its emotional shape sharpens. People may forget where the Western Gate stood, but they remember that no one should dig near the old mounds. This is how many lost places survive after collapse. Not as accurate maps, but as charged fragments. A dry well, a cursed palace, a queen who refused strangers, a buried market full of gold, a city that angered the heavens, a wall that still appears after storms. The evidence remains incomplete, but oral traditions often preserve real historical echoes inside transformed stories. A flood may become divine judgment. A drought may become a curse. A political betrayal may become the sin of an entire city. A slow retreat from environmental stress may become one terrible night when the sand rose and swallowed everything. The buried city, once governed by rules of access, remains forbidden because the story needs it to be. A place that was once restricted by guards, gates, and sacred boundaries becomes restricted by fear. The guardians change from officials to spirits, ancestors, curses, poisonous winds, collapsing chambers, and moral warnings. In some versions, the city is hidden because treasure hunters are not meant to find it. In others, because the dead still own it. In others, because the desert itself punishes greed. Such stories may sound like fantasy, but they often serve practical purposes. They keep children away from unstable ruins. They discourage grave robbing. They protect wells or sacred ground. They mark dangerous terrain where hidden cavities, loose sand, or sudden storms can kill the careless. Travellers add their own distortions. A caravan guide points toward a ridge and speaks of buried walls. A merchant repeats the tale in a distant market, where listeners add gold, giants, demons, lost kings, or secret books. A pilgrim hears of forbidden ruins and turns them into proof of moral decline. A soldier crossing the region describes strange stones in a report no one later fully understands. The farther the story travels from the sand itself, the more elaborate it becomes. Distance is one of a legend's favourite tools. Yet not everything in the legend is invention. The recurring details matter: hollow ground, lines of stone after storms, pottery scattered where no village stands, a place avoided by locals, a name that seems older than the language now spoken nearby, a dry channel leading toward a buried mound. Individually, these clues are fragile. Together, they suggest that memory is circling a real absence. Scholars still debate how much weight oral tradition should carry in reconstructing ancient sites. It cannot be treated as a simple record, because stories bend under religion, politics, memory, performance, and time, but it cannot be dismissed either. In many landscapes, especially where written records are scarce or lost, local knowledge preserves patterns outsiders overlook. A shepherd may know that a certain dune exposes bricks after winter winds. A nomad may know that animals avoid a patch of ground where old wells lie hidden. A family may remember that ancestors once collected worked stones from a place now considered unlucky. Archaeology often begins when someone listens carefully to people who never called themselves archaeologists. The city's forbidden reputation may also grow because visible ruins become more dangerous as they decay. A partially buried room can collapse under a person's weight. Wells hidden by thin crusts of sand can open suddenly. Old tombs may contain bad air, unstable ceilings, snakes, scorpions, or simply darkness deep enough to create panic. Treasure hunters, convinced that every lost city must contain wealth, can dig recklessly and vanish into their own tunnels. Each accident strengthens the warning. The city punishes intruders. The ruins do not forgive. The desert keeps what belongs to it. In time, the city's historical name may be lost or replaced. Later communities might attach a new name based on visible features, a legendary ruler, a moral tale, or a nearby landmark. The original language of its inscriptions, if any survive, may no longer be understood. Place names can outlive empires, but they can also mutate until only a faint sound remains. A sacred spring becomes a demon well. A royal enclosure becomes a giant's fort. A tax station becomes a treasure house. A city once known through administration becomes known through fear. This transformation is not merely ignorance, it is adaptation. Communities living near ruins explain them through the worlds they know. If the city's builders are gone, their works must be fitted into newer histories. Sometimes they become ancestors, sometimes foreigners, sometimes sinners, sometimes beings larger or older than ordinary humans. What survives in the record suggests that people often interpret abandoned monuments as evidence of a previous age unlike their own. Ruins invite the imagination because they are visibly human and yet socially unreachable. The desert intensifies this feeling. A ruined city in a green valley may become part of farmland, quarried gradually, folded into village life. A ruined city under dunes remains separate. It appears and disappears. It resists casual use. It may be too far from water to occupy, too dangerous to excavate without purpose, too haunted by reputation to treat as ordinary stone. The landscape itself helps preserve the aura of prohibition. For centuries, then, the city exists in a twilight state, not fully known, not fully forgotten. Caravan routes may still pass within sight of its buried outskirts, but fewer people understand what they are seeing. Some avoid it deliberately, others camp near it without recognizing the low mounds as walls. Sandstorms reveal fragments and conceal them again. A child finds a bead or a shard and is told to throw it away. A treasure seeker digs and finds nothing but collapsed brick. A scholar hears the story in a distant town and writes down a distorted version. Another writer copies that account, then another, until the city has drifted far from its own remains. The most persistent legends often contain contradiction. The city is said to be impossibly wealthy, yet cursed because of greed. It is said to be sealed, yet occasionally entered. It is said to lie under endless sand, yet certain guides claim to know the way. It is said to be dead, yet guarded. These contradictions do not weaken the legend. They keep it alive. A story too neat becomes settled. A story with unresolved edges invites retelling. No single explanation fully accounts for why some lost cities become famous in memory, while others vanish without a whisper. Size matters, but not always. Wealth matters, but not always. Location matters greatly. A city on a major route can leave rumours across huge distances, even after it falls. A city tied to sacred fear can survive in oral tradition long after its political importance disappears. A city buried dramatically beneath sand offers one of the most powerful images human beings know. Civilization reduced to silence by a force older and larger than itself. By the time modern explorers hear of it, the buried city is no longer only an archaeological possibility. It is a test of interpretation. Which parts of the legend are memory? Which parts are metaphor? Which parts are warning, exaggeration, or later invention? The answer is rarely clean. Legends are not maps, but they can point toward places maps have forgotten. They are not evidence in the same way a wall or inscription is evidence, but they can preserve the direction in which evidence may lie. And so the forbidden city waits inside two deserts at once. One made of sand, the other made of stories. The first hides its streets from the eye, the second hides its history from the mind. To find the city again, someone must cross both. They must enter a landscape where heat bends distance, where local memory mixes caution with myth, where ruins may be natural mounds and natural mounds may conceal walls. They must be willing to follow rumours without surrendering to them. They must look at a legend and ask not whether it is literally true, but why it survived. That question eventually draws outsiders back into the empty quarter. Not treasure hunters alone, though they come. Not dreamers alone, though they are never absent. Surveyors, archaeologists, pilots, geologists, historians, and local guides begin to reassemble the city from hints scattered across land and memory. The desert that seemed to have ended the story becomes the place where the next part begins. The rediscovery begins with disappointment. That is often how real archaeology starts, not with a golden doorway uncovered in the first hour, not with a buried palace waiting obediently beneath a thin skin of sand, but with wrong turns, false ridges, broken vehicles, overheated instruments, and long days spent staring at ground that refuses to become meaningful. The desert does not reward impatience. It offers too much space and too little certainty. A mound may be a collapsed wall, or it may be nothing more than wind-shaped sediment. A scatter of stones may mark an ancient structure, or a recent camp, or a natural deposit fractured by heat. A dark line seen from the air may be a buried road, a dry stream bed, a geological seam, or a trick of shadow. The old legends bring explorers close, but never close enough. A guide may know the name of a dangerous place, yet names drift. A traveller's account may describe a day's journey from a well that no longer exists. A map may mark ruins with confidence in the wrong valley. Earlier searchers may have mistaken one site for another and passed their error forward. In remote deserts, even measuring distance can become uncertain because routes bend according to water, terrain, season, and fear. The city is not simply lost beneath sand. It is lost inside centuries of imperfect directions. The first investigators often arrive with mixed motives. Some are trained scholars, others soldiers, surveyors, administrators, adventurers, antiquarians, or treasure seekers wearing the clothing of research. Their notebooks preserve moments of real observation, alongside assumptions that later generations must handle carefully. They record pottery, walls, wells, inscriptions, local stories, and strange mounds, but they also bring the biases of their own time. A ruin may be judged important only if it resembles the architecture already valued by outsiders. A local account may be dismissed because it is wrapped in myth, even when it preserves a useful clue. The evidence remains incomplete not only because the desert hides things, but because early observers sometimes fail to understand what they were seeing. Yet the search changes when the view rises above the ground. From the air, deserts reveal patterns invisible to those walking through them. Ancient roads appear as faint parallel tracks. Buried walls cast subtle shadows when the sun is low. Old river channels curl across plains like pale scars. Field systems, enclosure lines, and settlement mounds can stand out under conditions that last only minutes. Pilots crossing desert regions in the 20th century reported geometric shapes that seemed too regular to be natural. Some were mistaken, some were not. Aerial photography allowed archaeologists to see that empty landscapes were often full of structure, if one knew how to read them. Satellite imagery deepens this transformation. It does not magically expose every buried city, but it expands the field of suspicion. Different wavelengths can highlight soil moisture, vegetation stress, mineral differences, and buried features that subtly affect the surface above them. Radar can sometimes penetrate dry sand under certain conditions, revealing older surfaces, channels, or structures hidden below. Digital elevation models can show low rises and depressions too gentle for the eye to notice on the ground. The Forbidden City, once approached through rumour, becomes a problem in pattern recognition. Still, remote sensing can only suggest. It cannot replace excavation. A rectangle under the sand may be architecture, but it must be tested. A line may look like a wall until a trench reveals compacted sediment. A possible road may turn out to be a natural ridge. Scholars still debate many proposed desert sites because images can seduce the imagination. The more dramatic the legend, the easier it is to see what one hopes to find. Responsible archaeology moves slowly precisely because the desert produces convincing illusions. The first confirmed traces may be humble. Not a palace, but pottery. Not a gate, but a buried surface. Not an inscription naming the city, but a line of mud brick exposed beneath dune sand. A trench cuts into a low mound and reveals layers wind-blown sand above, collapsed debris below, occupation surfaces beneath that, ash, broken ceramics, animal bone, plaster, charcoal, perhaps a bead or seal fragment. Suddenly, the legend has weight, not proof of every story told around fires, but proof that people lived here, built here, ate here, worked here, and left material traces where the modern desert says they should not have been. The rediscovery becomes a collaboration between instruments and human memory. Local guides point toward places where storms uncover stone. Herders know where animals avoid unstable ground. Families remember older digging, older finds, older warnings. Archaeologists bring mapping equipment, sampling methods, conservation plans, and a suspicion of easy conclusions. Geologists explain dune movement, ancient channels, and sediment layers. Botanists and paleoclimatologists read pollen, seeds, and microscopic remains. The city begins to reappear not as a single revelation, but as a conversation among many kinds of evidence. One lesser-known challenge is that excavation itself can endanger what the desert has preserved. Sand may protect fragile walls by sealing them from rain, wind, and human interference. Once exposed, mud brick can crumble quickly. Organic materials can dry, crack, or decay when conditions change. Painted plaster may flake, textiles may disintegrate. Even footprints preserved under collapsed debris can vanish after careless exposure. Finding the city is only the beginning. Keeping it from being destroyed by discovery requires patience, funding, and restraint. This is why archaeologists often excavate selectively. To the public, it may seem strange to leave most of a site buried after searching so long to find it, but buried remains are sometimes safer underground, especially when conservation resources are limited. A trench here, a test pit there, a mapped surface, a protected sample, a carefully recorded wall. These fragments build knowledge without stripping the whole city open at once. The desert has taken centuries to bury the place. Archaeology must resist the temptation to undo that burial too quickly. As surveys expand, the city's scale begins to emerge. What first looked like one mound may be part of a larger complex. Low rises form a pattern around a central enclosure. Lines of stone or mud brick suggest streets. Depressions may mark wells or cisterns. Dark stains in the soil indicate hearths or refuse areas. Beyond the main settlement, traces of fields, channels, cemeteries, and caravan installations extend outward. The Forbidden City becomes less like an isolated treasure box and more like an urban landscape tied to water, labour, trade, and death. This is when legend begins to shrink and grow at the same time. It shrinks because some claims fail. No endless golden vault appears. No impossible technology announces itself. No evidence supports the more extravagant tales of supernatural destruction, or an untouched city sealed perfectly beneath the dunes. Popular theories may continue to circulate, especially those promising treasure or a civilization too advanced for its time. But such claims remain unsupported when they outrun the material record. The real city does not need those inventions. It grows because reality proves more interesting than fantasy in quieter ways. The site reveals planning where outsiders expected chaos. It reveals long-distance connections in a place assumed to be isolated. It reveals adaptation to water scarcity, social complexity, and environmental change. It reveals that the desert was not an empty barrier but a historical landscape full of roots, negotiations, settlements, and memory. The buried city becomes not a miracle, but a human achievement made fragile by the very conditions that made it powerful. Sometimes the most dramatic moment in rediscovery is not the uncovering of a monument, but the recognition of an ordinary object in an impossible place. a grinding stone in a buried room, a child's ornament near a threshold, seeds in a storage jar, animal bones showing what people ate, a seal impression hinting at administration, a repaired pot that tells of thrift in a period of strain. These things do not shout, they insist. They insist that the city was lived in, not merely imagined. They insist that its disappearance was historical, not just legendary. They insist that the desert's silence is full of unfinished sentences. As the excavators stand in trenches cut through the dunes, they see the layers of the city and the layers of its forgetting. Above them lies wind-blown sand, the long occupation of the desert. Beneath that lie collapsed walls, abandonment debris, occupation flaws, earlier construction, perhaps older settlement phases reaching back toward the time when the land held more water and promise. Each layer answers one question and raises another. The city is no longer entirely lost, but it is not yet understood. Rediscovery replaces absence with complexity. It turns a forbidden place into a field of evidence, but evidence does not speak all at once. It must be mapped, dated, compared, questioned, and protected. The old stories brought people to the edge of the site. Science begins the slower work of entering it. And under the sand, the ruins start to reveal what the legends could not. The ruins do not reveal the city by answering one great question. They reveal it by making thousands of smaller questions harder to ignore. A wall line appears first, then another. At the edge of a trench, mud brick courses show the patient rhythm of human hands, brick laid on brick. Plaster smoothed across the surface. Repairs added where heat or water damaged the structure. The bricks may be plain, but they hold information. Their size, clay mixture, straw temper, and construction style can place them within a building tradition. If bricks from later repairs differ from earlier ones, they may show periods of growth, shortage, or changing labour organisation. A city's history can survive in the thickness of a wall. Streets, when uncovered, are especially powerful. They restore movement. A room is a place, but a street is a habit repeated by generations. Its worn surface records feet, hooves, wheels, dragged loads, spilled ash, broken pottery, and repairs made after rain or sand accumulation. A main street leading from a gate toward an inner enclosure may confirm the hierarchy suggested by legend outsiders admitted but directed. Narrow side passages may show neighbourhoods built in stages rather than planned all at once. Drainage channels, raised thresholds, and compacted surfaces reveal how people manage sudden storms in a land usually defined by dryness. The desert does not receive much rain, but when rain does come, it can arrive with destructive force. Ancient builders knew this, and designed for rare disasters as well as daily heat. Ceramics appear everywhere, and to the untrained eye they may seem disappointing after stories of a forbidden city. Broken pots do not glitter, they do not satisfy treasure myths. Yet pottery is one of archaeology's most reliable voices. Cooking vessels, storage jars, bowls, lamps, transport amphorae, and fine wares tell different stories. A thick storage jar speaks of grain, oil, water, or dates. A soot-blackened cooking pot speaks of meals. A foreign vessel speaks of trade. A locally made imitation of a foreign style speaks of desire, adaptation, or changing supply. When imported pottery becomes rarer in later layers, it may suggest weakening exchange. When repair holes appear in vessels, they may suggest scarcity or thrift. What survives in the record often shows decline not as a dramatic end, but as people making objects last longer. In refuse heaps, the city becomes intimate. Animal bones reveal diet, economy, and environment. Goat, sheep, cattle, camel, donkey, gazelle, fish, bird, or shell remains can each shift the story. If fish bones appear in a site now far from water, they may point to vanished lakes, trade in dried fish, or special food practices. If camel bones become more common in later layers, that may indicate increasing dependence on long-distance desert mobility. Cut marks show butchery. Burn marks show cooking. Age patterns in herd animals can reveal whether people raise them locally or receive them through trade. Even dung, when preserved, can speak of fuel use, animal management, and vegetation. Seeds and pollen add another layer, often quieter but just as important. Charred grains may identify crops. Date pits may confirm oasis agriculture. Weed seeds can show field conditions. Pollen trapped in sediments can reveal plants growing nearby when the city was occupied. In some desert sites, preserved plant remains show that people cultivated or consumed species no longer viable in the area. This does not prove a lush paradise, but it can reveal a landscape less hostile than the modern one. Scholars still debate the exact balance between climate change and human water management in many such places, but botanical evidence makes one thing clear: the city's environment was not static. Then there are the water systems. If the ruins have a heart, it is not the palace or temple. It is the infrastructure that made life possible. Wells lined with stone or brick, cisterns plastered against leakage, channels running from catchment areas into storage basins, small dams in wadis to slow seasonal floods, underground conduits designed to reduce evaporation, terraces or field boundaries arranged to capture runoff. Each feature shows knowledge of scarcity turned into architecture. The city's forbidden power may have rested less on mystery than on maintenance. A plastered cistern can be more revealing than a royal statue. Its layers may show repeated repairs. Mineral deposits on its walls can indicate water levels. Sediment at the bottom can preserve microfossils, dust, seeds, and chemical signals. If a cistern is carefully maintained in early phases and poorly repaired in later ones, the pattern may mirror the city's weakening capacity. If channels are blocked by sand before the final occupation layer, water stress may have preceded abandonment. If channels are deliberately altered, people were adapting. No single explanation fully accounts for the city's fate, but water infrastructure often records the pressure more honestly than royal propaganda ever could. Inscriptions, if found, carry a different kind of weight. A single name can anchor a place in history. A dedication, tax record, ownership mark, merchant sign, prayer, or administrative seal can connect the city to known languages, rulers, gods, or trade systems. But inscriptions are often fragmentary. A few characters on pottery may be enough to suggest literacy, but not enough to reveal a story. A damaged stone may preserve a title without a person. A seal may show authority without explaining its reach. The evidence remains incomplete, and this incompleteness is precisely why ruins resist easy storytelling. Still, even fragments can overturn assumptions. Perhaps the city was not as isolated as legend claimed. Perhaps its rulers used symbols borrowed from a neighbouring kingdom. Perhaps local elites adopted foreign weights and measures. Perhaps the language of administration differed from the language of ordinary households. A forbidden city may turn out to have been multilingual, hybrid, and deeply connected to the world beyond its walls. Burial grounds add the most human evidence, and the most delicate. Graves can reveal health, diet, migration, status, trauma, and belief. But they must be studied with care and respect. Some burials may contain beads, vessels, tools, textiles, weapons, or food offerings. Others may be simple and unmarked. Differences in grave goods can indicate inequality, but interpretation is never automatic. A poor grave may reflect status, ritual choice, age, emergency, or later disturbance. Human bones can reveal signs of hard labor, disease, malnutrition, injury, or adaptation to climate. Isotopic analysis may show whether some individuals grew up elsewhere, suggesting migration, trade, intermarriage, or slavery. Ancient DNA, where preservation and ethics allow, may reveal population connections, but it must not be forced into simplistic stories of replacement or purity. One surprising detail from arid burials is the preservation of perishable things that usually vanish: woven mats, sandals, hair, cordage, basketry, seeds, wooden combs, and textile scraps. These objects bring the city closer than stone does: a sandal worn thin at the heel, a basket patched rather than discarded, a cord twisted by hand. Such things show skill, economy, and touch. They make the buried city feel less like an abstraction and more like a place where people wore out the objects of daily life. The architecture of the inner precinct may confirm the city's controlled access. Multiple walls, guarded passages, raised platforms, storage rooms, and restricted courtyards could suggest administrative or ritual separation. But caution remains necessary. A room that looks sacred may have been practical. A building interpreted as a palace may have served several functions. Archaeologists often revise their conclusions as more areas are excavated. Popular imagination wants every large structure to be a temple, throne room, or treasure vault. The material record is usually more complicated. Power often lives in ordinary-looking rooms where goods were counted, sealed, and redistributed. The ruins may also show contraction. Later occupation layers could cluster closer to the main water source. Outer districts may display abandonment debris earlier than central areas. Repairs may become rougher. Imported ceramics may decline. Food remains may change. Defensive walls may be patched hastily. These traces align with a city under strain, but they do not produce a single final scene. The fall remains a process rather than a moment. And then there is silence in the evidence. Certain expected things may be missing. Few weapons, few bodies in violent contexts, little sign of widespread burning, no clear destruction layer, or, in another possibility, too much disturbance from later looting to know. Absence is dangerous to interpret. It may mean something did not happen, or it may mean the evidence was not preserved, not excavated, or not recognized. Scholars still debate such absences because archaeology is always shaped by what has survived and where people choose to dig. By the end of the first major investigations, the city is no longer only a legend of buried walls. It becomes a real urban organism: water systems, roads, neighborhoods, markets, restricted spaces, burial grounds, workshops, and traces of long-distance exchange. The forbidden quality remains, but it changes form. It is no longer simply the warning of storytellers. It is built into the city's layout, its control of water, its hierarchy of access, and its dependence on knowledge guarded by those who understood the desert. The ruins reveal a place both impressive and vulnerable. A city that mastered scarcity but never escaped it. A city that drew the world toward its gates while keeping its center hidden. A city whose final secret is not whether it existed, but why its systems failed. The fall of the city is tempting to imagine as one decisive event. A final sandstorm, a breached gate, a poisoned well, a night of fire, a last caravan fleeing beneath a red moon while the desert rises behind it. Human memory likes endings with shape. It wants collapse to arrive as a scene that can be pictured, repeated, and understood. But the evidence from the ruins resists that simplicity. What survives suggests a slower and more complicated failure, one in which environment, economy, politics, belief, and human decision all press together until the old system can no longer hold. The first explanation is drought, because drought is the most visible enemy of a desert city. If rainfall declines, if floods become less predictable, if groundwater drops, if wells turn brackish, every part of urban life begins to suffer. Fields shrink, animals weaken, food prices rise. Disease can spread more easily among underfed people and crowded animals. The labour needed to maintain canals, cisterns, and wells increases at the same time that the population has less energy and fewer resources. A water system that once displayed authority becomes a record of stress. Deeper wells, repaired cisterns, abandoned channels, and changing crop remains may all point in this direction. But drought alone is rarely enough as an explanation. People in arid lands are not surprised by dry years. They plan around them. They store, ration, migrate, trade, and adapt. The question is not whether drought occurred, but whether it exceeded the city's capacity to respond. Scholars still debate how sharply climate shifted in many ancient desert regions, because local conditions could vary dramatically over short distances. One valley might retain groundwater while another failed. One oasis might survive because of deeper aquifers, while another collapsed when surface runoff declined. The buried city may not have been destroyed by dryness alone, but by dryness arriving in the wrong sequence, at the wrong political moment, after other supports were already weakened. The second explanation is trade collapse. The city's prosperity depended on movement, and movement is never guaranteed. If caravans found safer water elsewhere, if a rival settlement lowered taxes, if distant demand changed, if war closed a corridor, or if a major empire redirected its supply routes, the city's wealth would drain away without an army ever appearing at the gate. This kind of decline can be difficult to detect because it leaves behind absence rather than destruction. Fewer imported ceramics, fewer foreign ornaments, fewer ceilings, fewer animal remains associated with caravan traffic, a marketplace still functioning, but smaller, a city still alive, but less necessary. Trade collapse also damages authority. Rulers who once distributed imported luxuries, taxed caravans, and rewarded allies suddenly have less to offer. Officials may become harsher as revenue falls. Local elites may compete for control of remaining resources. Mobile groups who once cooperated with the city may shift loyalty toward more profitable routes. What had looked like a stable network is revealed to be a negotiation that must be renewed constantly. No single explanation fully accounts for the city's fall, but the loss of movement may have been as dangerous as the loss of water. The third explanation is conflict. A weakened city attracts pressure. Raiders may attack caravans near the city, damaging its reputation. Rival rulers may attempt to seize its wells or divert its trade. Internal factions may fight over succession, taxation, or control of sacred authority. Violence does not always leave a clean destruction layer. A city can be destabilized by repeated small conflicts, stolen animals, burned fields, blocked roads, murdered envoys, contested wells, unpaid guards. The ruins may contain patched defences, weapon fragments, trauma on human remains, or burned areas. But even these clues can be ambiguous. Fire may come from warfare, accident, ritual, or later occupation. Broken walls may result from attack, erosion, or reuse. The evidence remains incomplete. Disease is another possible factor, less visible but deeply plausible in stressed urban systems. Crowded settlements dependent on shared water sources are vulnerable when sanitation breaks down or malnutrition rises. Caravans connect cities not only to goods but also to pathogens. Animals and people moving across long distances can carry illness into populations already weakened by shortage. Yet disease is hard to prove archaeologically unless it leaves marks on bones or recoverable biological traces. Many deadly illnesses pass through the body without leaving clear skeletal evidence. A plague could have contributed to abandonment and leave little more than demographic silence. There may also have been a crisis of belief. This does not mean superstition caused collapse. It means the city's social order depended partly on confidence that its rulers, priests, rituals, and inherited laws could keep life aligned with the dangerous environment. When wells failed, fields shrank, caravans vanished, and stores emptied. People may have begun to doubt the institutions that claimed to stand between them and chaos. A sacred centre that once legitimized power could become a focus of anger. Offerings might increase in desperation, or decline because people no longer trusted the old rites. Temples might be maintained after neighborhoods emptied, or deliberately closed, stripped, or relocated. Archaeology can sometimes detect changes in ritual practice, but understanding what they meant remains difficult. The most persuasive explanation is therefore not one cause, but convergence. Imagine the city after several difficult decades. Rainfall has become less reliable. Outer fields produce poorly. Wells still function, but some require more labour. Trade is shifting toward a rival corridor. Officials raise taxes to compensate. Mobile groups demand higher payments to protect caravans. A political dispute divides the ruling family or priesthood. A disease season reduces labour. Sand accumulates in neglected channels. The city still stands, but every solution creates new strain. Then one sharp drought, one raid, one succession crisis, or one final trade diversion pushes the system past recovery. Collapse often looks sudden only because the final break is easier to see than the long weakening before it. The ruins of the Forbidden City may preserve this layered failure. There may be no universal burn layer, no mass grave, no inscription announcing defeat. Instead, the evidence points toward contraction, repair, adaptation, and abandonment. That pattern can frustrate those seeking a clean mystery, but it is closer to how civilizations often end. They do not simply disappear, they become smaller, poorer, less connected, less able to maintain complexity. They shed outer districts. They reuse old materials, they remember better times. They make temporary decisions until the temporary becomes permanent. A lesser known but important possibility is that the city did not end for everyone at the same time. Some residents may have moved to nearby settlements, carrying traditions, objects, and even institutional authority with them. Others may have joined mobile groups. Some families may have returned seasonally to tend graves, harvest dates, or collect useful materials. The city as an urban centre may have died, while its people survived elsewhere. This matters because popular language often says a civilization vanished when, in truth, its political form collapsed and its descendants continued under different conditions. The mystery of the fall is therefore partly a mystery of perspective. From the desert, the city vanishes. From the viewpoint of its former inhabitants, life may continue in altered form. Names change, routes shift, rituals adapt, memory compresses. the forbidden city becomes a lost place, but not necessarily a lost people. Still, something essential is gone. The walls no longer organize power. The wells no longer draw caravans at the same scale. The inner precinct no longer controls access to the sacred or administrative heart. The market no longer hears a dozen accents at once. The water system, once the city's triumph, becomes vulnerable to sand. The city's identity depends on coordination, and coordination fails. In the end, the fall may be best understood not as punishment, not as mystery alone, and not as a single disaster, but as the failure of a balance. For centuries, perhaps longer, the city survived by holding together opposite secrecy and trade, scarcity and abundance, settlement and movement, ritual and administration, desert and urban life. When those opposites could no longer be held in tension, the city lost the conditions that made it possible. The desert did not need to hate it. The desert only needed the balance to break. A buried city attracts two kinds of attention. One kind begins with patience. It measures walls, compares pottery, samples sediment, studies water systems, reads fragments cautiously, and accepts that some questions may remain unresolved for a very long time. The other kind begins with desire. It wants hidden chambers, forbidden knowledge, treasure sealed beneath the sand, maps suppressed by authorities, vanished kings whose wealth waits untouched, or a secret civilization erased from history because it was too strange to fit ordinary explanation. The first kind builds slowly. The second travels faster. This is where the city becomes dangerous in a different way. Not because its ruins are cursed, but because mystery invites invention. A place half hidden beneath desert sand offers perfect material for exaggerated claims. The landscape is remote. The evidence is fragmentary. The old stories already speak of prohibition and loss. Photographs of dunes and half-buried walls create atmosphere before they create understanding. It becomes easy for unsupported theories to attach themselves to the site like wind-blown debris. Some say the city was destroyed in a single supernatural punishment. Others claim it holds treasure beyond imagination. Some insist its builders came from a lost race unknown to archaeology, or possessed knowledge far beyond their time. Modern versions may add secret tunnels, hidden libraries, suppressed maps, or impossible astronomical alignments. These claims often borrow real details: a buried wall, an unusual artifact, a local legend, a satellite image. Then they stretch those details beyond what the evidence can bear. The problem is not wonder. Wonder is necessary. Without it, no one would cross deserts looking for traces of the past. The problem is certainty without evidence. The real city is already remarkable. It does not need to be made impossible. Its people built a functioning urban world in a landscape where survival depended on precision. They managed water, trade, labour, ritual, and political authority under conditions that would defeat most casual visitors in a day. Their achievement is diminished, not enhanced, by fantasies that remove human skill from the story and replace it with vague marvels. Treasure myths are the most persistent. They appear almost wherever ruins exist, especially ruins connected to rulers, temples, or forbidden spaces. The logic is simple and powerful. If a city was wealthy and then vanished, its wealth must still be buried there. But ancient abandonment is rarely so generous to treasure hunters. Valuable objects are among the first things removed when people leave deliberately. Metal is melted down and reused. Timber is taken. Tools are carried away. Sacred objects may be relocated. Later scavengers search ruins long before modern explorers arrive. What remains is often ordinary, broken, and far more informative than gold. A repaired cooking pot can explain more about the city's final years than a jewel ever could. A blocked channel can say more about collapse than a treasure room. A layer of wind-blown sand inside a house can reveal abandonment more clearly than a dramatic legend. This is the dry understatement of archaeology. The past usually survives not in what people valued most, but in what they lost, broke, discarded, or could not move. Another false trail comes from treating every unexplained feature as evidence of a mystery beyond human ability. A wall aligned with sunrise may be meaningful, or it may follow terrain. A deep shaft may be ritual, or it may be a well. A chamber without obvious domestic objects may be sacred, administrative, storage-related, or simply disturbed. A geometric pattern on satellite imagery may be a building, a field system, a modern track, or natural geology. Scholars still debate many interpretations because uncertainty is part of the work. Unsupported theories often rush into that uncertainty and pretend it is proof. There is also the temptation to imagine the city as completely isolated from known history. The phrase Forbidden City encourages the idea of a sealed world, cut off from ordinary civilizations and preserving some pure, hidden culture. The evidence points in a more interesting direction. Imported goods, road systems, administrative traces, animal remains, and stylistic influences suggest contact. The city may have controlled access, but it was not outside history. It belonged to networks of exchange and power. Its secrecy was not isolation, it was management. Popular stories sometimes turned local communities into obstacles to discovery, as if people living near the ruins merely guard secrets or repeat superstitions. This is another distortion. Local knowledge often preserves crucial information names, routes, warnings, memories of old finds, awareness of unstable ground, and traditions tied to water or burial places. Such knowledge may be shaped by legend, but so are many written sources. The task is not to dismiss it or romanticize it. The task is to listen carefully, compare it with material evidence, and recognize that landscapes are remembered differently by those who live in them. A more modern false trail comes from satellite imagery itself. From above, the desert seems to promise hidden order. Lines, rectangles, circles, shadows, and pale scars appear everywhere. Some are ancient, many are not. Wind, water, salt, geology, animal paths, vehicle tracks, and recent human activity all create patterns. The human brain is extremely good at finding shapes, even when the shapes are accidental. Remote sensing is powerful, but it must be grounded. Without excavation, dating, and field survey, an image remains a possibility, not a conclusion. No single explanation fully accounts for why unsupported ideas flourish around lost cities, but part of the answer lies in the emotional force of disappearance. A vanished city feels like an accusation against time. It suggests that something once important can be reduced to rumor. People resist that. They want the lost to have a secret reason, a hidden villain, a cosmic judgment, or a revelation waiting beneath the sand. Ordinary collapse can feel too human, too familiar, too close. But the grounded explanation is not ordinary in the sense of being dull. It is ordinary in the sense that it belongs to real human life. Water failed, trade shifted, power strained, people argued, adapted, left, returned, remembered, and forgot. The desert covered the rest. There is gravity in that story because it does not require invention. It asks us to accept that civilization can end through processes that are understandable and still devastating. The city's disputed theories also reveal something about the present. Each age creates the lost city it wants. Treasure hunters imagine wealth. Romantics imagine forbidden beauty. Nationalists may try to claim it as proof of ancient superiority. Conspiracy-minded writers imagine suppression. Spiritual seekers imagine hidden wisdom. Scholars, at their best, imagine questions. The ruins remain the same, but the stories built upon them change. What survives in the record keeps pulling the city back toward earth. Mud brick, ash, bone, seed, plaster, pottery, sand. These are humble materials, but they have discipline. They do not say everything, yet they resist being forced to say anything. They show a place made by human beings under specific environmental and historical pressures. They show achievement without magic, collapse without melodrama, and mystery without surrendering to fantasy. The false trails will not disappear. They are part of the city's afterlife now, another layer of story laid over the sand. Some will fade, others will return in new forms whenever a photograph, survey result, or rumour appears. That is the price of a place whose evidence remains incomplete, and whose atmosphere is so powerful. But the deeper one looks, the clearer the distinction becomes. The unsupported theories promise a secret that explains everything. The ruins offer something better, a reality that refuses to become simple. The desert is not empty after a city disappears. It is full of archives, but they are not arranged for human convenience. A library keeps records in rooms, shelves, labels, and deliberate order. The desert keeps them in layers, drifts, stains, fractures, dry channels, buried floors, salt crusts, and bones. It preserves without explaining. It destroys without malice. It hides one wall for 1,000 years and exposes another just long enough for wind to tear it apart. To read such an archive, archaeologists must accept that the desert is both witness and editor. It stores the past. But it also cuts pages from the book. Sand can protect a city with astonishing gentleness. A room filled quickly after abandonment may remain sealed from rain, sunlight, and casual looting. A wooden beam may survive where it would have rotted in a wetter climate. Textile fragments, basketry, seeds, rope, leather, and written materials can endure in dry conditions that seem almost miraculous. Even footprints, tool marks, and reed impressions in mud brick can survive if burial is rapid and disturbance minimal. What survives in the record suggests that deserts sometimes preserve the fragile details of daily life better than grander, wetter landscapes. But preservation is never guaranteed. Sand moves. Salt crystallizes inside walls and breaks them apart. Rare floods can cut through ancient layers in a single night. Heat fractures stone. Wind abrades exposed surfaces until inscriptions soften and vanish. Burrowing animals disturb floors. Later travelers dig pits, reuse bricks, or leave modern debris among ancient remains. The same conditions that seal one part of a city may erase another. The evidence remains incomplete because the desert chooses unevenly. This unevenness is why the city seems to appear and disappear even after rediscovery. One season, a wall line is visible across a dune face. The next, it is gone. A storm reveals pottery, then another storm scatters it. A trench carefully opened by archaeologists may begin to deteriorate as soon as sunlight reaches it. A buried room may preserve delicate materials until exposure changes temperature and humidity. The act of discovery becomes a kind of risk. To uncover is also to endanger. The desert archive also extends beyond the city itself. Dry riverbeds leading toward the settlement can record older water systems. Ancient fields may survive as faint lines visible only from above. Pollen trapped in sediments can reveal vanished vegetation. Lake deposits can preserve chemical clues about rainfall and evaporation. Dune layers can show periods of increased wind activity. Hearths from temporary camps can map the movements of people who never lived inside the walls but made the city possible through trade, herding, guiding, or seasonal labour. This wider landscape matters because a city is never only its buildings. Its survival depended on routes, water points, grazing zones, fields, cemeteries, watch posts, quarry sites, clay sources, and the labour paths connecting them. A buried city without its surrounding landscape is like a sentence with most of the words removed. The walls may impress, but the desert around them explains why they were built, why they mattered, and why they failed. One lesser-known difficulty is that desert surfaces can preserve very old material beside much newer traces, making time appear flattened. A stone tool from deep prehistory may lie near a pottery shard from the city's occupation and a modern cartridge case, all visible on the same surface after erosion. Without careful dating and context, the landscape can trick observers into linking things that belong to different worlds. The desert compresses time visually even when history separates it by thousands of years. This is one reason fieldwork must move slowly. Archaeologists map not just objects, but relationships. Where was an artifact found? Was it embedded in a sealed layer, lying on the surface, washed from elsewhere, or disturbed by later digging? Was a wall built before or after the channel beside it? Did sand enter a room while the building still stood, or after the roof collapsed? Did people abandon a district before the final phase, or did later erosion remove the evidence of occupation? These questions may sound technical, but they decide whether the story becomes grounded or imaginary. The desert can also preserve absence. An abandoned field system may show where crops no longer grew. A blocked canal may show maintenance stopped. A road fading into disuse may show caravans chose another path. Empty spaces become evidence when understood against the larger pattern. No single explanation fully accounts for the city's disappearance, but the desert's archive may reveal sequences: first reduced water flow, then contraction of settlement, then decline in imports, then abandonment of outer districts, then burial. Each stage leaves traces, if the right layer survives. Yet some things remain beyond recovery. The voices of ordinary residents are mostly gone. The exact words spoken when families decided to leave are gone. The fears, arguments, bargains, and private griefs are gone except where they touched material things. Archaeology can show that a house was abandoned, but not always whether its owners left with hope or despair. It can show a repaired jar, but not the person who decided it is worth repairing. It can show a shrine remained active, but not whether worshippers felt confidence or desperation. This limitation does not weaken the story, it gives it honesty. The buried city is not a puzzle with every piece waiting neatly under the sand. It is a damaged archive of human adaptation under pressure. Some pages are clear, some are burned, some are missing, some have been rewritten by later hands. Scholars still debate the sequence of events because the evidence deserves debate. Certainty would be easier, but less truthful. The desert, meanwhile, continues its work. Even now, it is moving across the ruins. Grains of sand strike exposed walls, dunes shift around excavation edges, rare rain cuts new channels through old deposits, modern roads, tourism, looting, climate change, and development may threaten what earlier centuries left untouched. A site buried safely for ages can become vulnerable the moment it becomes known. Protection becomes part of the story, because rediscovery does not end the city's danger. There is a strange humility in this. The ancient builders fought the desert with wells, walls, channels, and discipline. Modern researchers fight a different version of the same struggle with maps, permits, conservation materials, shelters, documentation, and restraint. Both are trying to hold form against movement. Both know that neglect gives the desert an advantage. And perhaps that is why the city remains so compelling. It is not only buried under sand, it is buried inside time, environment, memory, and interpretation. Every layer removed reveals another layer beneath. The forbidden city becomes less forbidden as evidence accumulates, yet more profound because its mystery changes. It is no longer simply the question of where the ruins are. It is the question of how landscapes remember what people forget. The desert does not tell the story kindly, but it keeps enough of it to make silence speak. The city is not only under the sand, it is also scattered through the living landscape around it, in ways less dramatic than buried walls but sometimes more enduring. A ruin may fall silent, yet the country that once sustained it continues to hold fragments of its presence. A place name survives in altered form. A root bends around a mound no one farms. A well remains avoided, respected, or used only in emergency. A seasonal camp appears near an ancient water point because practical knowledge outlives political power. A story told by elders marks a boundary where maps show none. The city's stones may be hidden, but its outline can remain in custom, movement, and memory. This is one of the quiet surprises of vanished places. They rarely vanish equally for everyone. Outsiders may lose them entirely, but people living near them often preserve relationships with the site long after its original name. Rulers and institutions disappear. Those relationships are not always archaeological in a formal sense. They may be pastoral, spiritual, cautionary, territorial, or simply practical. A family may know where old bricks can be found. A guide may know which dune exposes pottery after strong winds. A herder may know that a shallow depression holds moisture longer after rain. A community may avoid an area not because of abstract superstition, but because generations have learned that the ground collapses there. What survives in the record suggests that local memory can preserve environmental history as well as human history. Stories of vanished water, lost gardens, dead wells, or a green plain beneath the dunes may sound poetic, but they sometimes echo real landscape change. A tale of a city drowned in sand may remember dune migration. A warning about a cursed well may preserve knowledge of contamination, collapse, or conflict. A story about forbidden entry may descend from old rules governing sacred precincts, cemeteries, or elite compounds. Scholars still debate how far such memories can be traced backward, because oral tradition changes over time, but to dismiss it outright is to miss one of the desert's most resilient archives. The roots are especially revealing. Even when a city no longer functions, paths may continue to curve toward it or away from it. Human movement is conservative. People follow ways that already exist, especially in harsh terrain where a bad choice can be fatal. A caravan road may shift after a city falls, but not disappear instantly. Herders may still pass near the ruins because water or shelter remains. Pilgrims may avoid the old centre but visit a nearby shrine that inherited part of its sanctity. Traders may stop at a successor settlement built closer to surviving wells, carrying with them fragments of the old city's market customs, weights, stories, or alliances. In this way, the city's legacy may be less like a monument and more like a current underground. It flows through changed forms. A new village reuses stones from old walls. A shrine relocates an ancient sacred focus into a later religious language. A tribal boundary follows an older canal or road whose original purpose has been forgotten. A market day continues at a nearby oasis because the habit of exchange has outlived the city that once organised it. Descendants of former residents may not identify themselves by the buried city's name, yet their crafts, songs, water rites, or seasonal movements may carry traces of older patterns. This does not mean every local custom is a direct survival from the lost city. That would be too simple. Cultures change, merge, break, and reinvent themselves. People migrate. Languages shift. Conquests and conversions reshape memory. The evidence remains incomplete, and claims of perfect continuity should be treated carefully. But total rupture is also unlikely. Human communities are skilled at carrying useful practices forward, even when political structures fail. Water management knowledge, in particular, tends to survive because it is necessary. A method for cleaning a channel, reading seasonal signs, lining a well, storing dates, or moving herds between grazing zones may last long after palaces collapse. The buried city's legacy also lives in absence. Empty land is not always empty by accident. A stretch of desert may remain uncultivated because water vanished. A mound may be left untouched because it is known as a burial place. A route may avoid a ruin because of fear, respect, or bad ground. A community may remember that digging there brings misfortune, which can protect archaeological remains more effectively than any modern fence. Prohibition, once a feature of the living city's inner order, becomes a protective custom after its death. Modern archaeology increasingly recognizes the importance of these living relationships. Excavation without local knowledge risks misunderstanding the landscape. A satellite image can show a line. A resident may know it as the old road. A survey map can mark a depression. A herder may know it gathers water for 2 days after rare rain. An archaeologist can date pottery. A storyteller can explain why people still fear the mound where the pottery appears. Neither form of knowledge replaces the other. Together, they make the city more legible. There is also an ethical weight here. Lost cities are often presented as if they belong only to the distant past, waiting for outsiders to recover them. But ruins exist in present landscapes inhabited by present communities. The buried city may be part of local identity, local caution, local livelihood, or local sacred geography. To uncover it is not merely to solve an ancient mystery. It is to alter the meaning of a place people still live with. Conservation, tourism, research, and publicity can bring resources, but also disruption, looting, exclusion, and damage. No single explanation fully accounts for a city's afterlife, because that afterlife continues to change. The desert itself is changing too. Modern climate pressures, groundwater extraction, roads, mining, conflict, and development can transform remote areas faster than the slow dune movement that buried the ancient city. A ruin protected for centuries by isolation may be threatened by vehicles in a single generation. A site once known only to local guides may become visible to the world through online images. Treasure hunters can arrive with metal detectors and machinery. Well-meaning visitors can trample fragile surfaces. The city's forbidden reputation may no longer be enough to protect it. And yet the living landscape still offers protection of another kind of memory with responsibility. When communities are treated as partners rather than obstacles, old warnings can become modern stewardship. Knowledge of paths, seasons, sand movement, and sacred boundaries can guide preservation. Local stories can help identify areas needing survey. Young people can inherit not just fear of ruins, but understanding of why they matter. The city that once organised water and movement may now ask a different kind of organisation from those who study and protect it. In the end, the buried city's legacy is not confined to its ruins. It survives in the way people imagine the desert, in the caution attached to certain places, in the roots that still remember water, in names that sound older than their explanations, and in the tension between curiosity and respect. The city vanished as a political centre, but it did not leave no trace. It became part of the landscape's behaviour. The dunes covered the walls. They did not entirely cover the memory of where the walls had been. What remains forbidden is not simply the buried city itself. The walls have been found in fragments. The streets have begun to reappear. The water systems can be traced in broken channels, lined wells, plastered cisterns, and dry catchments. Pottery, bones, seeds, ash, and collapsed rooms have pulled the city out of pure legend and placed it back into history. Yet even after rediscovery, even after survey maps and excavation records, something about the place resists possession. The desert gives evidence, but never surrender. It allows the city to be approached, measured, sampled, and described, while still keeping the final shape of its life just out of reach. This is not failure, it is the nature of deep history. Archaeology can reveal that people lived here, traded here, worshipped here, governed here, repaired walls, managed water, raised animals, buried their dead, and eventually left. It can show that the city was not fantasy, not merely a treasure tale, not an impossible kingdom outside ordinary human experience. But it cannot restore every missing voice. It cannot recover every decision made in the last years. It cannot tell us exactly what a mother said when she packed her household goods, or what a priest felt when the final offerings were removed, or whether the last guards believed they were abandoning the city forever. The evidence remains incomplete, and that incompleteness is not a gap to be filled with fantasy. It is part of the truth. The Forbidden City was once forbidden by design. Its gates sorted strangers from residents, its inner precincts limited access, its wells, stores, rituals, and records were controlled by people who understood that power in a desert begins with knowing who may approach water, who may enter sacred space, and who must wait outside the wall. Later, after abandonment, it became forbidden by fear. Ruins collapsed. Wells opened beneath sand. Tombs warned away the curious. Stories placed curses where regulations once stood. Now, in the modern age, it becomes forbidden in a third sense, not untouchable because of superstition, but because knowledge itself must proceed carefully. Some things should not be stripped open merely because they can be found. The city asks for restraint. Excavation can answer questions, but it can also destroy the conditions that preserve the answers. Tourism can bring attention, but also footprints, theft, erosion, and careless fascination. Publicity can protect a place by making it valued, or endanger it by making it famous. The city's future depends on a delicate balance not entirely unlike the one that shaped its ancient life access and restriction. Curiosity and protection, discovery and patience. Scholars still debate the central mystery because no single explanation fully accounts for all the evidence. Climate stress matters, trade routes matter, political strain matters, conflict, disease, belief, maintenance, and migration may all have played roles. The city probably did not vanish in one cinematic catastrophe, even if later stories remembered it that way. It likely declined through a convergence of pressures, each one survivable alone, but devastating together. That is a quieter explanation, but also a more unsettling one. It suggests that collapse does not always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives as extra work, delayed caravans, deeper wells, harsher taxes, smaller markets, repaired jars, and families who say they're only leaving for a season. What remains most powerful is the contradiction at the city's heart. It was hidden and connected, sacred and practical, resilient and fragile, a place of walls that depended on roads, a place of secrecy that survived through exchange, a place built against the desert that could only exist because its people understood the desert intimately. The city was not defeated by emptiness. It was part of a living landscape that changed around it until the old balance failed. That is why the ruins matter beyond themselves. They remind us that deserts are not blank spaces on the map, and lost cities are not simply puzzles for treasure hunters. They are records of human intelligence under pressure. They show how people create order in extreme conditions, and how that order can endure for centuries while still remaining vulnerable to shifts too large or too slow for any one generation to fully grasp. The Forbidden City remains partly unreachable because the past is always partly unreachable, but enough survives to change the silence. Beneath the dunes there are walls shaped by hands, streets worn by feet, water systems planned with care, and traces of people who did not know they would become a mystery. They were not living in legend. They were living in weather, hunger, labour, faith, trade, fear, and hope. The desert buried them. It did not make them unreal. The desert grows quiet again. After the walls, the wells, the roots, the warnings, and the long work of rediscovery. What remains is an image of sand moving over human attention. A city once stood where the horizon now seems almost empty. People measured water there. They argued over trade and taxes. They buried their dead. They watched caravans arrive in dust and depart into uncertainty. They built walls because they believed the world inside them could last. For a while it did. That may be the most haunting part. The city was not doomed from the beginning. It was not imaginary, foolish, or impossible. It was a real answer to a difficult landscape, and for generations that answer worked. Its people understood things modern observers can only reconstruct from fragments: how to read dry channels, how to keep a well alive, how to store against hunger, how to make strangers useful without letting them too close, how to live with the desert without pretending it had been conquered. Then the balance changed. The city became memory, then warning, then rumour, then ruin, then evidence. Each age buried it in a different way. Sand covered the streets. Stories covered the sand. Modern curiosity uncovered enough to prove that something extraordinary had been there, but not enough to make it fully ours. Perhaps that is fitting. Some places should remain partly distant, not because they are supernatural, and not because history is afraid of being known, but because the past is made of lives too complete to be reduced to one explanation. The buried city under the desert leaves behind a quieter lesson than the legends promised. Civilizations are not only destroyed by enemies at the gate, sometimes they are undone by slower forces, a road shifting away, a season failing, a well deepening, a storehouse emptying, a belief losing strength. And yet people survive in altered forms, They carry names, habits, fears, and memories onward, even when the walls vanish behind them. The dunes continue to move. Somewhere beneath them, rooms remain dark. A broken jar rests where it fell. A threshold waits under sand no foot has crossed in centuries. Above it, the wind smooths the surface again, leaving no sign that a city ever stood there, except for the old stories, the scattered clues, and the stubborn human need to look at emptiness and wonder what it is hiding.